I made 19 trips back into hell and brought 300 souls to freedom, and I can tell you this: I never lost a single passenger on my railroad. My name is Harriet Tubman, and they called me Moses because I led my people out of bondage. But what they didn't tell you is that Moses was a 5-foot-tall black woman who carried a pistol and trusted God more than any human law. Before I tell you how I outwitted slave catchers, navigated by stars, and became the most wanted woman in the South with a $40,000 bounty on my head, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to follow more stories of courage that changed history. They named me Araminta Ross when I was born around 1822 on a Maryland plantation, but everyone called me Minty. I was the 5th of 9 children born to Harriet Green and Ben Ross, both enslaved, both dreaming of freedom they would never see. My mother was a cook in the big house. My father a timber worker who knew every tree, every path, every creek in those Maryland woods. He taught me to move silent through the forest, to read the moss on tree trunks that always grew north, to listen to the owls and know which direction they were calling from. He didn't know he was training a conductor. He thought he was just teaching his daughter to survive. When I was 5 years old, they hired me out to a woman named Miss Susan, who needed someone to check her muskrat traps in the icy river. I was so small I had to wade into water that came up to my chest, my fingers going numb, my whole body shaking with cold. When I got sick with measles and couldn't work, Miss Susan sent me back like broken merchandise. My mother nursed me back to health, singing spirituals over my fevered body, whispering, "You're meant for something, child. God's got plans for you." I didn't understand then. I was just a sick 5-year-old who wanted her mama. But Mama knew. Mothers always know. At 7, they sent me to another household to be a nursemaid and clean houses. The mistress there, Miss Emily, would whip me before breakfast if the baby cried in the night, would whip me after dinner if I missed dust in the corners. I have scars on my back that tell the story of those years, raised keloid reminders that my body was not my own. One night, after a particularly brutal whipping, I lay on my stomach in the slave quarters and thought about running. But I was 7 years old. I didn't know where north was. I didn't know about the Underground Railroad. All I knew was pain and the impossibility of escape. The defining moment of my childhood came when I was 12 or 13 years old. I was in a dry goods store when an overseer came in chasing an enslaved man who had left the fields without permission. The man ran, and the overseer demanded I help block his escape. I refused. I stood in the doorway and let that man run past me into freedom, even though I knew what was coming. The overseer picked up a 2-pound iron weight from the counter and threw it at the running man. It missed him and hit me square in the forehead, fracturing my skull, nearly killing me. I was unconscious for days, hovering between life and death while my mother prayed and the plantation owner calculated whether I was worth the cost of a doctor. When I finally woke, everything had changed. The injury left me with a condition that caused sudden sleeping spells, moments where I would fall into deep sleep without warning, sometimes in the middle of a conversation, sometimes while walking. The plantation owner said I was damaged goods, worthless now. But that injury gave me something he couldn't see: visions. In those sleeping spells, I dreamed of flying over fields and fences, of being free, of leading others to freedom. Some called it brain damage. I called it prophecy. In 1844, at around 22 years old, I married a free black man named John Tubman. I thought maybe marriage would bring some kind of security, some small measure of control over my life. I was wrong. John was free, but I was still enslaved, still property, still subject to being sold at any moment. I told him about my dreams of running north, of escaping to freedom. He laughed. "You'll die out there," he said. "You'll get caught, and they'll kill you. Just accept what you are." I looked at this man I had married and realized he would never understand. He had been born free. He didn't know what it felt like to be owned. In 1849, I heard rumors that I was about to be sold south, deeper into the Cotton Kingdom, where life expectancy for enslaved people was measured in years, not decades. I made my decision. I would run. I would risk everything for a chance at freedom. I tried to convince John to come with me. He refused. I tried to convince my brothers to run. They agreed at first, then lost their courage and turned back, forcing me to return with them. But 2 days later, I tried again, this time alone. Just me, the North Star, and my father's teachings about how to read the land. I walked 90 miles from Maryland to Pennsylvania, traveling only at night, hiding during the day in swamps and forests and barns of sympathetic Quakers who were part of the Underground Railroad. I followed the North Star, waded through creeks to throw off the dogs, survived on berries and whatever food kind strangers gave me. When I finally crossed the border into Pennsylvania, into free soil, I looked down at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything, I later said. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. But freedom tasted bitter when I realized everyone I loved was still in chains. My mother, my father, my brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews, all still enslaved in Maryland, while I stood free in Philadelphia. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom, I said. I was a stranger in a strange land. That's when I made my vow, the vow that would define the rest of my life. I would go back. I would make trips south into slave territory and bring my family out one by one, and then I would bring out everyone else I could. In 1850, I made my first trip back south. My niece Keziah and her 2 children were about to be sold at auction in Cambridge, Maryland. I coordinated with Keziah's free husband, a man named John Bowley, to bid on his own wife and children, then rush them to a safe house before the slaveholder could collect payment. From there, I guided them north through the Underground Railroad network, traveling by night, hiding by day, using every trick my father had taught me about moving through the wilderness invisible. When we reached Philadelphia, and I delivered Keziah and her children to freedom, I knew I had found my calling. The second trip was for my brother Moses and 2 other men. The third trip was for my brother James and several others. Each trip was more dangerous than the last, because my success made me wanted. Slave owners put up reward posters. Runaway slave Harriet, also known as Minty, reward for capture. The amount grew with each successful rescue until it reached $40,000, more money than most people would see in a lifetime. I was the most wanted woman in Maryland. But I kept going back because I had made a promise to myself and to God. I would not rest while my people were in chains. I developed a system, a set of rules that kept me alive and kept my passengers safe. We traveled only in winter when nights were longest. We left on Saturday nights because notices about runaways couldn't be printed in newspapers until Monday. I carried a pistol, not just to defend against slave catchers, but to discourage any passenger who might lose courage and want to turn back. "You'll be free or die," I told them. It sounds harsh, but I couldn't risk someone getting caught and revealing the routes and safe houses. Dead people tell no tales, but captured runaways under torture tell everything. I used disguises constantly. Sometimes I dressed as an old woman, hunched and shuffling, who aroused no suspicion. Sometimes I dressed as a man, walking boldly through slave territory like I belonged there. Once, I walked right past my former owner on a street in Maryland, carrying live chickens. When I saw him looking my way, I released the chickens and made a show of chasing them, cackling like an old crazy woman. He never gave me a second glance. Another time, I was on a train and saw a man who could read and might recognize me from wanted posters. I picked up a newspaper and pretended to read it, even though I couldn't read at the time. The man assumed no illiterate slave woman would hold a newspaper, so I couldn't be the wanted Harriet. The Underground Railroad was a network of safe houses, secret routes, and brave people, both black and white, who risked everything to help freedom seekers. I worked closely with abolitionists like Thomas Garrett in Wilmington, Delaware, who helped over 2,700 enslaved people escape, and once said of me, "I never met with any person of any color who had more confidence in the voice of God." There was William Still in Philadelphia, who kept detailed records of everyone who passed through his station. There were the Quakers, who hid people in false-bottomed wagons and secret rooms. We were a secret army fighting a war for human freedom. My most dangerous trip came in 1857 when I went back for my parents. They were old now, in their 70s, too elderly to walk 90 miles through wilderness. I built a crude wagon, settled them in it, and pulled them north myself. An elderly couple hidden under blankets and supplies, their daughter serving as their horse. It took weeks, moving slowly, the wagon creaking on rough roads, my parents trying not to cough or make noise when we passed patrols. When we finally reached Canada, where they would be truly safe from the fugitive slave law, my father wept. He had spent 70 years enslaved and was free at last. Canada became the final destination for many of the people I rescued because the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 meant that enslaved people weren't safe anywhere in the United States. Slave catchers could come to Pennsylvania or New York or Ohio and legally seize black people, free or enslaved, and drag them south. So I led my passengers all the way to St. Catharines in Ontario, Canada, where they could truly be free. "I wouldn't trust Uncle Sam with my people no longer," I said. I brought them all clear off to Canada. Between 1850 and 1860, I made 19 trips back into Maryland and other slave states. 19 times I walked back into danger. 19 times I risked capture, torture, death. I brought out approximately 300 people, though the exact number is uncertain because we kept few records to protect people's safety. What is certain is this: I never lost a passenger. Not one single person in my care was ever captured. "I never ran my train off the track," I said, "and I never lost a passenger." That perfect record was not luck. It was skill, courage, and divine guidance. People ask me how I did it, how a woman with sleeping spells who couldn't read or write became the most successful conductor on the Underground Railroad. The answer was simple. I trusted God more than I feared man. Before every trip I prayed. During every dangerous moment I prayed. When slave catchers came close, when dogs were on our trail, when passengers wanted to give up, I prayed and I listened for God's voice telling me which way to go. I always told God, "I'm going to hold steady onto you, and you've got to see me through," I said. And He always did. The spirituals we sang weren't just songs, they were coded messages. Wade in the water meant avoid the roads and walk through streams to throw off the dogs. Swing low, sweet chariot meant the Underground Railroad was coming. Follow the drinking gourd meant follow the Big Dipper constellation north. We communicated in a language the slaveholders couldn't understand, hiding our plans in plain sight, singing our freedom songs while they thought we were just entertaining ourselves. Every spiritual was a map, every hymn a strategy session. My reputation grew until I became a legend in both the black community and the abolitionist movement. Frederick Douglass, the great orator and former enslaved person himself, said of me, "Excepting John Brown, I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than Harriet Tubman." John Brown, the radical abolitionist who would later raid Harper's Ferry, called me General Tubman and wanted me to join his armed resistance. I supported his goals, but couldn't participate in the raid because I fell into one of my sleeping spells at the critical moment. When the Civil War began in 1861, I knew immediately that this was the war to end slavery, even though President Lincoln initially claimed it was only about preserving the Union. I volunteered my services to the Union Army and became a scout, spy, and nurse. I was the only woman to lead an armed military raid during the Civil War when I guided Colonel James Montgomery and his troops up the Combahee River in South Carolina, liberating over 700 enslaved people from plantations. I stood on that gunboat and watched hundreds of people running toward freedom, and I thought of all the trips I had made, all the 19 journeys, all the 300 people, and I knew it was all worth it. After the war, I settled in Auburn, New York on land I had purchased years earlier. I married a man named Nelson Davis, a veteran of the Civil War, and we built a life together. But I never stopped fighting for justice. I fought for women's suffrage, speaking at conventions alongside Susan B. Anthony and Emily Howland. I fought for proper pensions for black Civil War veterans and their widows. I established the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, a place where elderly black people could live with dignity. Until I died in 1913 at approximately 91 years old, I worked for the freedom and dignity of my people. Looking back on my life, on those 19 trips south, on the 300 souls I guided to freedom, people ask me about fear. Weren't you terrified? They ask. Didn't you want to give up? The answer is yes, I was terrified every single time. But fear is not the absence of courage. Courage is acting despite fear, is choosing freedom over safety, is deciding that other people's lives matter more than your own comfort. Every step I took back into Maryland was terrifying. Every moment I spent hiding in a swamp with slave catchers nearby was terrifying. But I kept moving because the alternative was accepting slavery, and I would rather die than accept that. My legacy is not just the 300 people I personally freed. It's the thousands of descendants those 300 people had, all living free because someone was willing to risk everything. It's the inspiration I provided to other conductors, other freedom fighters, other people who decided they would not accept injustice. It's the proof that one person, armed with faith and courage, can change the world. I was born enslaved, considered property, told I was worth less than a horse or a plow. I died free, having liberated hundreds, having served my country in war, having fought for justice until my last breath. The Underground Railroad was not a single path, but a network of thousands of paths, all leading north, all leading to freedom. Some paths went through swamps and forests. Some went through cities and towns. Some went across rivers and over mountains. But they all had one thing in common. They were walked by brave people who decided they would rather risk death than live in chains. I walked those paths 19 times, and each time I learned something new about human courage, about the strength of the human spirit, about the lengths people will go to for freedom. My 19 trips south were not heroic adventures. They were desperate necessities, dangerous missions undertaken because no one else would do them. I was not superhuman. I was a woman who experienced pain, fear, doubt, exhaustion. I was a woman who suffered from sleeping spells that could have gotten me killed at any moment. I was a woman who watched people I loved remain in slavery because I couldn't reach them in time. But I was also a woman who refused to accept the unacceptable, who chose action over despair, who believed that freedom was worth any price. To the 300 people I guided to freedom, you were never cargo on my railroad. You were human beings deserving of dignity, deserving of liberty, deserving of every good thing this world could offer. I didn't save you. You saved yourselves by choosing to run, by trusting a stranger in the night, by believing freedom was possible. I was just the guide. You were the brave ones who took the first step into the unknown. Your courage inspired me more than you could ever know. To my parents, Harriet and Ben, who taught me to survive, to navigate, to trust in God. Every person I freed in your names. Every safe arrival was a prayer of gratitude for what you gave me. You died in freedom because I refused to let you die in chains. That was my gift to you, my way of saying thank you for the life you gave me, for the love you showed me, for the strength you instilled in me. To future generations reading this story, Understand that the freedom you enjoy was purchased with blood, tears, and tremendous courage. People died for your right to be free. People risked everything so you could live without chains. Honor that sacrifice by fighting injustice wherever you see it, by refusing to accept oppression, by being willing to risk something for someone else's freedom. Be conductors on your own underground railroads, whatever form those railroads take in your time. The 19 trips I made were not just physical journeys from Maryland to Canada. They were spiritual journeys from despair to hope, from bondage to liberation, from powerlessness to agency. Every trip taught me something about faith, about trusting in divine guidance even when the path ahead was dark. Every trip showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that justice matters more than safety. Every trip reminded me that we are not defined by what is done to us, but by what we choose to do in response. I am Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Ross around 1822, died in freedom in 1913. I was enslaved for the first 27 years of my life. I was free for the next 64. In those 64 years of freedom, I made 19 trips south into slave territory. I guided approximately 300 people to freedom. I served as a spy, scout, and nurse in the Civil War. I fought for women's suffrage and the rights of elderly black people. But my greatest achievement was proving that one person can make a difference, that courage is stronger than fear, that freedom is worth any risk. The Underground Railroad still exists today, though it takes different forms. It exists wherever people risk something to help others, wherever someone sees injustice and chooses to fight it, wherever courage overcomes fear. You can be a conductor on today's Underground Railroad by standing up for the vulnerable, by refusing to be silent in the face of oppression, by choosing other people's freedom over your own comfort. The tracks are still there. The North Star still shines. All you need is the courage to take the first step. Freedom is not a destination, but a journey that continues through generations. The freedom I fought for was the freedom to not be property, to not be bought and sold, to control my own body and life. The freedom you must fight for may look different, but the principle is the same. All human beings deserve dignity, deserve agency, deserve the chance to define themselves. That fight continues. It will always continue, and it will always need conductors willing to risk everything to guide people home. Memory is how we honor the ancestors. We remember not to dwell in the past, but to learn from it, to draw strength from it, to understand that we stand on the shoulders of giants. I stand on the shoulders of my mother Harriet, who survived slavery with her spirit intact. I stand on the shoulders of my father Ben, who taught me to read the land. I stand on the shoulders of every enslaved person who resisted, who ran, who fought back, who refused to accept their chains. And future generations will stand on my shoulders, will draw strength from my story, will remember that freedom is always possible. Ancestral strength flows through our blood like a river, connecting us to everyone who came before, everyone who survived impossible circumstances, everyone who chose hope over despair. When I was walking those 90 miles to freedom, exhausted and terrified and alone, I felt my ancestors walking with me. When I went back south for the first time, I felt them guiding my steps. When I stood before slave catchers with a pistol in my hand, I felt their courage flowing through me. We are never alone. We carry with us the strength of everyone who came before. Human dignity cannot be given or taken. It is inherent, inalienable, eternal. Slavery tried to strip us of our dignity by treating us as property, by denying our humanity, by breaking our bodies and spirits. But dignity survived. It survived in the songs we sang, the prayers we prayed, the families we loved, the dreams we dreamed. It survived in every act of resistance, every escape attempt, every moment we asserted our humanity against a system designed to deny it. And it survived in people like me who said, I am human, I deserve freedom, and I will risk everything to claim it. The 19 trips I made south were my way of saying to the world, you cannot own us, you cannot break us, you cannot stop us. For every enslaved person I brought north, I was declaring war on slavery itself, saying this evil institution will not stand, will not last, will not define us. And I was right. Slavery ended, the chains were broken. The people I guided to freedom lived to see it, lived to tell their children. We were enslaved, but we became free. That transformation, from enslaved to free, is the story of American black people, and it is a story of triumph. I am Harriet Tubman. I never lost a passenger on my railroad. I made 19 trips back into hell and brought 300 souls to heaven. I prove that faith can move mountains, that courage can break chains, that one woman with a pistol and a prayer can change the course of history. My story is not just about the past. It's about the present and the future, about the ongoing fight for freedom, about the eternal struggle for justice. The railroad still runs. The North Star still guides. And somewhere someone is taking their first step toward freedom, just like I did all those years ago. And when they take that step, I am with them. We are all with them. The ancestors are always with us, guiding us home.